I never thought my life would end on a Tuesday afternoon, collapsing on the sidewalk 3 blocks from the Rossi mansion. But there I was, my vision tunneling into darkness, my heart hammering irregularly against my ribs, like a prisoner desperate to escape. The last thing I remember before hitting the pavement was the weight of the grocery bag slipping from my fingers and the distant sound of apples rolling into the gutter. My name is Maya Torres, and for 3 years I've been invisible. Not literally, of course, but in the way that domestic workers become part of the furniture in wealthy homes. I clean, I cook, I maintain the pristine facade of Michael Rossi's mansion, and in return, I receive a paycheck and health insurance that keeps my son Mason alive. That's the transaction. That's always been the transaction. But 3 weeks ago, something changed inside my chest. It started as a flutter, like a hummingbird had taken residence behind my breastbone. Then came the dizziness, the shortness of breath. The nights I'd wake up gasping for air, as if I'd been drowning in my sleep. I knew what it meant. I've had a heart condition since I was 17, a defect that doctors said would eventually require surgery. Eventually had apparently arrived. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? Vincent Torelli, the operations manager who oversaw all of Michael Rossi's legitimate business holdings, including the household staff, had made it crystal clear during my last performance review. We need people who can work, Maya, not people with problems. You understand what I'm saying? The boss doesn't pay for weakness. So I pushed through. I worked through the chest pains that made me grip the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white. I worked through the dizzy spells that forced me to sit on the bathroom floor with my head between my knees. I worked through the exhaustion that made every step feel like I was climbing a mountain. Because losing this job meant losing the health insurance. And losing the health insurance meant losing Mason. My son is 8 years old and has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The treatments cost more than I'd make in 5 years. The insurance through Rossi Enterprises covers it. Without that coverage, Mason dies. The mathematics were simple and brutal. My life or his. I chose him every single time. That Tuesday, I'd been working for 14 hours straight. Vincent had called that morning demanding I stay late to prepare for a business dinner Michael was hosting. Never mind that I'd already worked 6 consecutive days without a break. Never mind that I could barely stand without the room spinning. Vincent didn't care about never minds. He cared about results and compliance, and the subtle threat that always lingered beneath his words. You know how replaceable you are, right, Maya? The dinner went smoothly. I served 7 courses to men in expensive suits who discussed things I didn't understand in voices that commanded rooms. Michael Rossi sat at the head of the table, and I watched him the way I always did, trying to reconcile the man with his reputation. In the house, he was polite, distant, occasionally kind in an absent-minded way. He remembered my son's name once, asked how the treatments were going. It surprised me so much I nearly dropped the serving platter. But I knew what he was outside these walls. Everyone knew. Michael Rossi wasn't just wealthy. He was dangerous. The kind of man whose name appeared in newspapers with words like alleged and suspected, carefully placed before criminal activities. The kind of man who inspired both loyalty and terror in equal measure. The kind of man you didn't burden with your personal problems because personal problems were weaknesses, and weakness was something his world devoured. After the dinner, after cleaning the kitchen until every surface gleamed, after Vincent finally dismissed me with a curt nod that communicated both approval and contempt, I gathered my things and stepped into the autumn evening. The walk home was only 15 minutes, but it might as well have been 15 miles. My chest felt tight, compressed, like someone had wrapped steel bands around my lungs. I made it 3 blocks. 3 blocks between the mansion and my apartment, between keeping up appearances and complete physical collapse. 3 blocks before my heart decided it had endured enough. The arrhythmia hit like a freight train. One moment I was walking, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other, and the next, My heart was doing something that felt like jazz improvisation, beating in rhythms that made no biological sense. My vision darkened at the edges. The grocery bags I'd filled at the corner store during my 2 brief lunch break suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. I tried to call out, but my voice came out as a whisper. Then the pavement rushed up to meet me, and everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. Seconds? Minutes? Time became elastic, unreliable. I have fractured memories of the aftermath. Sirens, voices, someone's hands checking my pulse. But the first clear moment, the one that's burned into my memory with perfect clarity, was opening my eyes to see Michael Rossi kneeling beside me on the dirty sidewalk. His expression was something I'd never seen before. Not the polite distance of an employer, not the cold calculation I'd glimpsed during business meetings. This was raw, human concern. His jacket was draped over me like a blanket, and his hand was on my shoulder, steady and grounding. "Maya," he said, and his voice carried an urgency that sent my addled brain into panic mode. "The paramedics are here. They're going to take care of you." I tried to sit up, tried to explain that I was fine, that I just needed a moment, that I'd be back to work tomorrow. The words came out garbled, senseless. My heart was still doing that terrible, irregular dance, and breathing felt like trying to inhale through a straw. "Don't move," Michael ordered, and it was an order, the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You collapsed. You need medical attention." "I can't," I managed to whisper, and tears I couldn't control started streaming down my face. "The insurance, my job, Mason needs—" "Your son will be fine," Michael interrupted, and something in his tone made me believe him. "And so will you. That's not something you need to worry about right now." But it was all I could worry about. Because men like Michael Rossi, no matter how kind they seemed in a moment of crisis, didn't keep employees who were liabilities, and I'd just become the biggest liability imaginable. The paramedics loaded me onto a stretcher, and I watched Michael step back, his expensive shoes now scuffed from kneeling on the concrete. He was speaking rapidly into his phone, issuing instructions to someone. I caught fragments. "Full medical workup. Whatever she needs. Bill it to my personal account." Then they closed the ambulance doors, and I lost sight of him. As we pulled away, sirens wailing, I closed my eyes and wondered if I'd just lost everything I'd sacrificed so much to keep. The job, the insurance, the ability to save my son. I had no way of knowing that my collapse on that sidewalk was about to unravel secrets that would shake the foundation of Michael Rossi's entire organization. That my desperate attempt to hide my illness had inadvertently exposed a rot that went far deeper than anyone suspected. That the man who'd knelt beside me on that dirty pavement was about to discover just how many people in his employ were suffering in silence, terrorized into complicity by the very systems he'd created. All I knew in that moment was the irregular thunder of my failing heart and the certainty that when I woke up, everything would be different. What I couldn't have imagined was just how right I was. The hospital room was too white, too sterile, too expensive looking for someone like me to occupy. I woke to the steady beep of a heart monitor and the uncomfortable weight of IV lines in my arm. My first coherent thought was about Mason. Who was watching him? My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, only had him until 6 o'clock. Then my second thought crashed over the first like a wave. I'd collapsed. At work. In front of my employer. I was finished. The nurse who appeared when I stirred was gentle and efficient, checking my vitals with practiced ease. "Welcome back, Mrs. Torres. You gave everyone quite a scare. How are you feeling?" "How long have I been here?" My voice came out rough, sandpaper on wood. "About 6 hours. They brought you in around 3. It's just after 9 now." She adjusted something on the IV stand. "Your son is fine, by the way. Mr. Rossi arranged for a care service to pick him up from school and stay with him at your apartment. Someone named Mrs. Chen met them there." I stared at her, trying to process this information. Michael Rossi had arranged childcare for my son? I don't understand. Mr. Rossi has been quite adamant about your care, the nurse said, and something in her tone suggested this was an understatement. He's made it very clear that you're to receive every necessary treatment, and that cost is not a factor. The cardiology team has already reviewed your case. Before I could respond, the door opened and a doctor entered, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an iPad under her arm. Ms. Torres, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, the cardiology specialist assigned to your case. I need to have a very serious conversation with you about your heart condition. The next 20 minutes were a blur of medical terminology that basically boiled down to, I was dying. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily and inevitably. The congenital heart defect I'd been living with had deteriorated significantly. The episodes I'd been experiencing were a symptom of heart failure. Without surgery to repair the defect and possibly implant a pacemaker, I had maybe 6 months. With surgery, I could live a normal life. Why didn't you seek treatment sooner? Dr. Chen asked, and it wasn't accusatory, just genuinely confused. Your medical records show you were aware of this condition. I couldn't afford to take time off, I said simply. And I was afraid if I disclosed the severity, I'd lose my job and my insurance. My son has leukemia. His treatments are covered through my employer. If I lost that coverage, I didn't need to finish the sentence. Dr. Chen's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked like heartbreak. So, you chose to die slowly rather than risk your son's treatment. That's not a choice, I said quietly. That's just mathematics. A knock on the door interrupted us. The nurse opened it, and Michael Rossi walked in, still wearing the same suit from earlier, though now it was rumpled and his tie was loosened. He looked like a man who'd had a very long day. Mr. Rossi, Dr. Chen said, standing. I was just explaining to Ms. Torres the severity of her condition. I'd like to hear it as well, Michael said, pulling a chair close to my bed and sitting down with the easy authority of someone who belonged wherever he chose to be. Everything. Dr. Chen walked him through it. The same explanation she'd given me, but perhaps with more technical detail. Michael listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Schedule the surgery, he said finally. Whatever she needs. Whatever her son needs. All of it. Mr. Rossi, I started, but he held up a hand. We'll talk after the doctor leaves. Dr. Chen took the hint, making notes on her iPad. I'll have the surgical team evaluate you tomorrow morning. Given the urgency, we'll likely schedule the procedure for this week. She paused at the door. Ms. Torres, you're very fortunate Mr. Rossi found you when he did. Another hour, and we might be having a very different conversation. When we were alone, Michael leaned back in his chair and studied me with an intensity that made me want to hide under the hospital blankets. How long have you been sick? A few weeks, maybe a month. And you kept working. I had to. Because you thought if you told anyone, you'd be fired. It wasn't a question. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Who told you that? His tone had changed, sharpened. Who made you believe that disclosing a medical condition would cost you your job? I hesitated. There was something in his voice that wasn't quite anger, but was equally dangerous. It's not. Nobody had to tell me. I just understood the expectations. Maya. The way he said my name made it a command. Who specifically made you feel that asking for medical accommodation would result in termination? I thought about Vincent Torelli's face during that performance review, the casual cruelty in his smile. Your operations manager, I said quietly. Vincent. He's made it clear many times that you have no patience for employees with problems. Something flickered across Michael's face, gone too quickly for me to identify. Tell me exactly what Vincent said to you. So I did. I told him about the performance review where Vincent had questioned whether I was really committed to my position. About the time I'd asked for a single afternoon off for Mason's treatment and been told that special accommodations set a bad precedent. About the implicit threats, the constant reminder that I was replaceable, the atmosphere of fear that permeated every interaction with management. And it's not just me, I found myself saying, the words spilling out now that the dam had broken. Elena in housekeeping has been working with a broken wrist for 2 weeks because she's terrified to report it. Marcus, one of the drivers, is diabetic but doesn't manage it properly because Vincent told him that chronic conditions were reliability issues. We're all just surviving. Michael's jaw tightened. How many employees are we talking about? In the household staff alone? Maybe 15 of us who I know are dealing with something. But I think it's worse in the other operations. The warehouse workers, the people at the restaurants you own. I've heard stories. He pulled out his phone and typed something rapidly. I need you to make a list. Every employee you know who's been intimidated or coerced regarding medical issues. Every incident you can remember. Every conversation with Vincent or anyone else in management that made you feel you couldn't seek help. Why? I asked. What does it matter now? Michael looked at me, and I finally identified the emotion I'd seen flickering across his face. It was fury, cold and controlled and absolute. Because I don't tolerate exploitation in my organizations, and if what you're telling me is true, then I've allowed a systematic abuse of power to occur under my watch. That ends now. I could lose my job for talking to you about this, I whispered. You won't. The certainty in his voice was almost frightening. But other people might. And they should. He stood, pacing to the window. I built my businesses on loyalty, Maya. Real loyalty, earned through protection and fair treatment. If Vincent has been creating an environment where my people are too afraid to ask for basic human dignity, then he's not just betraying you. He's betraying everything I've built. I'd never heard him speak like this, with such personal intensity about the business operations. The Michael Rossi I knew from the mansion was cordial but distant, more concerned with dinner menus than employee welfare. This man was different, engaged, angry on behalf of people he barely knew. Rest tonight, he said, turning back to me. Focus on your health. I'm assigning someone to stay with Mason until you're recovered. Not a stranger. Sarah from accounting has a son his age. She's already agreed to help. Your apartment rent will be covered while you're out. Your full salary continues. And when you're ready to come back, we're going to have a very different conversation about your role in my organization. I don't understand, I said weakly. Why are you doing this? Michael paused at the door, his hand on the handle. Because you shouldn't have had to choose between your life and your son's. Nobody should. And the fact that you felt you had to tells me I've been blind to what's happening in my own house. He met my eyes. That changes now. All of it. After he left, I lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had just happened. I'd collapsed expecting to lose everything. Instead, I'd somehow triggered something that felt much bigger than me. Michael Rossi had looked at me not with pity, but with recognition, as if my suffering had revealed something he'd been missing. I didn't know it then, but my collapse had done more than expose Vincent Torelli's cruelty. It had awakened something in Michael, a realization that the empire he'd built was hollowed out by the very fear he'd once thought inspired loyalty. And once awakened, Michael Rossi didn't do anything by halves. The revolution was coming. And I, Maya Torres, the invisible housekeeper who'd collapsed on a Tuesday afternoon, had just become its unlikely catalyst. The surgery happened 3 days later. Dr. Chen's team repaired my heart defect and installed a pacemaker in a 6-hour procedure that I barely remember. What I do remember, with crystal clarity, is waking up in recovery to find Sarah from accounting sitting beside my bed, showing me photos on her phone of Mason and her son Timothy building a massive Lego structure together. "He's been asking about you constantly," Sarah said with a warm smile. "But he's also having the time of his life. Timothy's convinced Mason is his new best friend. They've planned out the next 2 weeks of activities already." The relief was overwhelming. Not just that Mason was safe and happy, but that someone from my workplace was treating this situation with kindness rather than resentment. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice still rough from the intubation. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Sarah's expression grew serious. "Maya, you don't owe me anything. What you've been going through shouldn't have happened. And between you and me?" She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "A lot of us had no idea how bad things had gotten. Mr. Rossi has been asking questions. A lot of questions. Things are about to change pretty dramatically around here." She wasn't wrong. While I was recovering in the hospital, Michael had launched what could only be described as an internal inquisition. I learned about it gradually, through Sarah's visits, and eventually through Michael himself, who appeared in my room 2 days post-surgery, with a laptop and a grimly determined expression. "I need to show you something," he said, setting up the computer so I could see the screen from my bed. "But I'm warning you, it's going to make you angry." What he showed me was a spreadsheet, a detailed, meticulous spreadsheet that Vincent Torelli had been maintaining for 3 years. It tracked every employee who had disclosed a medical condition, chronic illness, or family health issue. Next to each name were notes: leverage points, acceptable pressure levels, replacement priority. I stared at my own name on the list. Next to it, Vincent had written, "Son's cancer treatment. Total compliance. Can push to maximum capacity. Will not resign." "Oh my God," I breathed. The clinical coldness of it, the calculated cruelty, made my stomach turn. "There's more," Michael said, his voice tight with controlled rage. He clicked to another tab. This one showed a financial tracker. Vincent had been systematically skimming from the healthcare fund, approving reduced coverage for employees he deemed high maintenance, and pocketing the difference in premiums. Over 3 years, he'd stolen nearly $200,000, while simultaneously ensuring that the people who needed medical care most had the least access to it. "Elena's broken wrist?" Michael continued. "Her coverage was reduced to a high-deductible plan without her knowledge. She couldn't afford the out-of-pocket costs for treatment. Marcus, your diabetic driver?" Vincent denied his insulin pump as not medically necessary and kept the coverage money. "There are 37 people on this list, Maya. 37 employees across my businesses who were being actively exploited while I was completely oblivious." I couldn't speak. The scope of it was staggering. "I found the files by accident," Michael said. "After our conversation, I went to Vincent's office to pull personnel records. He kept these on a separate server, password protected. My IT team cracked it." He closed the laptop. "Vincent is already gone. I fired him yesterday and turned all of this over to the authorities. He'll face criminal charges for embezzlement and possibly fraud." "The others he put on that list, are they okay?" "I've personally contacted every single one of them. Full coverage restoration, back pay for any medical expenses they incurred, and a formal apology from me for not catching this sooner." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "But here's what I need your help with, Maya, because getting rid of Vincent isn't enough." He pulled his chair closer to my bed. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how you all knew you couldn't ask for help, about the culture of fear. Vincent created that intentionally, but he was able to because the structures allowed it. Because I built an organization that valued results over people, and that created blind spots where predators like him could thrive." "You didn't know," I said, though even as I spoke, I wondered if that was entirely true. "I should have known," Michael countered. "That's my failure. I built walls between myself and the people who work for me. I made assumptions about loyalty without ensuring I deserved it. And now I need to fix it. But I can't do it alone. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. I need someone who understands what it's like on the other side of that wall. Someone who knows where the systems break down, where the abuse can hide, where people fall through the cracks. Someone who gives a damn about protecting the vulnerable because they've been vulnerable themselves. It took me a moment to realize what he was asking. You want me to? What, exactly? I want you to build a new human resources department from the ground up. Not the existing HR. They missed all of this, which means they're either complicit or incompetent. I want a department that actually advocates for employees, that creates channels for people to report problems without fear, that audits our healthcare coverage and working conditions regularly. I want someone who will tell me the truth about what's happening in my own organization, even when that truth is uncomfortable. I stared at him. I'm a housekeeper. I have a high school diploma and 3 years of experience cleaning your mansion. You want me to run human resources? I want you to protect people the way you've been protecting your son. I want you to fight for employees the way you fought to keep working despite dying. I want you to care, Maya, because caring seems to be in dangerously short supply in my operations. He paused. You'll have a team. I'm hiring professional HR consultants to handle the legal and technical aspects. But I need someone leading it who understands what actually matters. Someone who won't be intimidated by management or swayed by politics. Someone who's already survived the worst this organization can throw at them. My heart, my newly repaired, steadily beating heart, was racing. That's insane. Probably, he agreed. But you're the only person I trust to do this right. You've seen the system from the bottom. You know where it's broken. And you have every reason to want to fix it. I have no qualifications. You have experience, which is more valuable. And you'll have resources, training, authority, and my full backing. Anyone who tries to undermine you will answer to me directly. His expression softened slightly. I know it's overwhelming. Take time to think about it. Focus on recovering first. But Maya, I need you to understand something. You didn't just survive Vincent's abuse. You exposed a rot that I didn't know existed. You've already made my organization better just by being honest about what you endured. Imagine what you could do with actual power. Over the next 2 weeks, as I recovered from surgery and gradually regained my strength, the idea grew on me. Michael was serious. He brought in consultants who interviewed me extensively about my experiences. He had his legal team draft policies specifically designed to prevent the kind of exploitation Vincent had perpetrated. He created a confidential reporting system and hired an external ombudsman to investigate complaints. But more than that, he listened. Every concern I raised, every structural problem I identified, he addressed. When I pointed out that employees in lower wage positions couldn't afford the out-of-pocket costs even with good insurance, he implemented a medical expense fund. When I explained how the scheduling system made it impossible for single parents to maintain work-life balance, he revised the entire approach to shift planning. Sarah visited regularly, updating me on the changes rippling through the organization. People are stunned, she said during one visit. We've had 3 different managers investigated and removed in the last week. The warehouse supervisors who were forcing overtime without pay, the restaurant manager who was skimming tips, the guy in accounting who was pressuring women employees. It's like Michael suddenly developed X-ray vision for corruption. He's angry, I said simply. And when powerful men get angry, things change. It's more than anger, though, Sarah mused. It's like he's taking this personally. Like he's offended that this happened under his watch. Yesterday, he spent 4 hours talking to the warehouse workers directly. No management present, just asking them what they needed. Do you know how unprecedented that is? I did, actually, because Michael visited me every other day, and in those visits he'd talked about his vision for what the organization should be. He spoke about loyalty, but a different kind than I'd imagined. Not the loyalty born from fear or dependency, but the loyalty earned through mutual respect and genuine care. My father built this business on fear, he told me during one late-night visit after Mason had fallen asleep in the chair beside my bed. He believed that people only worked hard when they were afraid of the consequences of failure. I inherited that philosophy without questioning it. But fear doesn't build loyalty, Maya. It builds resentment and self-preservation. You proved that. How did I prove that? You were so afraid of losing your job that you nearly died rather than ask for help. That's not loyalty. That's survival instinct. And if my best employees are operating from survival instinct rather than genuine commitment, then I haven't built a sustainable organization. I've built a pressure cooker waiting to explode. He looked at Mason, sleeping peacefully despite the hospital room's beeping monitors. Your son doesn't know how close he came to losing you. And you don't know how close I came to being responsible for that loss. Not directly, but through negligence. Through creating a system that allowed Vincent to thrive. That's on me, and I don't take that lightly. 3 weeks after my surgery, Dr. Chen cleared me for limited activity. I was still recovering, still building my strength back. But I was alive. More than alive. I was healthier than I'd been in years. The pacemaker hummed quietly in my chest, a small miracle of modern medicine that I'd been certain I'd never be able to afford. Michael arranged for a car to take me home. When I arrived at my apartment building, I found something had changed. The lobby had been renovated. There was a new security system, fresh paint, and a package delivery room. When I reached my floor, Mrs. Chen was waiting outside my door with Mason. Maya! My son launched himself at me, and I caught him carefully, mindful of my still healing chest. He was crying and laughing simultaneously. I missed you so much. Timothy's mom is really nice, but she's not you. I missed you too, sweetheart. So much. Mrs. Chen smiled warmly. The building improvements are courtesy of Mr. Rossi. He did every residential building where his employees live. Security upgrades, maintenance issues fixed, everything. Said it was unacceptable that his people lived in substandard conditions. She shook her head wonderingly. In 40 years in this city, I've never seen an employer do something like that. Inside my apartment, I found more surprises. The kitchen had new appliances. The bathroom had been updated. There was a letter on the table in Michael's handwriting. Maya, your home should be a place of rest and recovery, not another source of stress. Consider these improvements a small down payment on the better environment I should have provided all along. Take another 2 weeks to recover fully. When you're ready, we begin building something better. Mimster. That night, after putting Mason to bed and sitting in my newly comfortable living room, I made my decision. I called Michael, half expecting to reach voicemail. He answered on the first ring. I'll do it, I said. The HR position, building the new department, all of it. There was a pause then. You're sure? I'm sure, but I have conditions. Name them. Complete autonomy in hiring my team. Direct reporting line to you, not through any other management. Authority to investigate and recommend termination for any employee regardless of seniority. And a promise that if I tell you something is wrong, you'll believe me and act on it, even if it's uncomfortable. Done. All of it. Anything else? I thought about Elena's broken wrist, Marcus's denied insulin pump, the 37 names on Vincent's list. Yes. I want a commitment that no employee will ever again choose between their health and their job. Real commitment, backed by policy and practice and accountability. You have my word, Michael said, and I believed him. Welcome aboard, Director Torres. Director. The title felt surreal. But as I sat in my renovated apartment, my repaired heart beating steadily, my son sleeping safely in the next room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not just for myself, but for every employee who'd been suffering in silence, convinced they had no choice but to endure. The revolution Michael had promised was coming, and I was going to make damn sure it mattered. My first day as Director of Human Resources and Employee Welfare was supposed to be inspiring. I imagined walking into a new office, meeting my team, beginning the important work of transforming Rossi Enterprises from the inside. Instead, I spent my first morning facing a conference room full of hostile managers who looked at me like I was an invasive species threatening their ecosystem. "With all due respect, Mr. Rossi," said Thomas Grant, the Senior Vice President of Operations, who'd stepped into Vincent's old role temporarily. "Ms. Torres has no experience in human resources management, no degree in organizational psychology, no background in labor relations, no understanding of the legal complexities involved in employee management across multiple business units. How exactly is she qualified to oversee this department?" I sat at the conference table in my new professional attire, a suit Michael had insisted on buying me, claiming it was standard business expense, and felt the familiar weight of being underestimated. It was different from being invisible, but equally challenging. These men saw me as Michael's charity case, a feel-good gesture rather than a serious appointment. Michael, sitting at the head of the table, didn't even glance at Grant. His eyes were on me, waiting to see how I'd respond. This was a test, I realized. Not of my qualifications, but of my ability to hold my ground. "You're right, Mr. Grant," I said calmly. "I don't have a degree in organizational psychology. What I have is 3 years of experience being systematically exploited by your organization, while you and every other senior manager in this room failed to notice or care. I have the perspective of someone who was literally dying while working for you because I was too terrified to ask for help. And I have the backing of Mr. Rossi to ensure that never happens to anyone else." I stood, walking to the presentation screen where I'd prepared a slideshow. "But since you're concerned about my qualifications, let me share what I've learned in the 6 weeks since my collapse. I've interviewed 73 employees across all business units. I've reviewed 5 years of workers' compensation claims, medical leave requests, and exit interview data. And I've identified patterns that should horrify anyone who actually cares about this organization's integrity." I clicked to the first slide. It showed a graph of workers' compensation claims over time. "Notice anything interesting? Claims dropped by 40% over the last 3 years. Sounds good, right? Except employee injuries reported to emergency rooms in the same period increased by 60%. People were getting hurt. They just stopped reporting it to the company." Next slide. "Medical leave requests declined by 55%. But when I interviewed employees, I found that 23% reported working while seriously ill or injured. Why? Because they believed, correctly it turns out, that taking medical leave would result in retaliation. I let that sink in. Thomas's expression had shifted from dismissive to uncomfortable. Exit interviews show that 38% of departures in the last 2 years cited management culture as their primary reason for leaving. But when I spoke to those people directly, using confidential channels, 72% reported specific incidents of bullying, intimidation, or coercion related to medical or family issues. I clicked to a final slide showing Vincent Torelli's embezzlement spreadsheet. And all of this was happening while your operations manager was actively exploiting the most vulnerable employees and stealing from the healthcare fund. None of you noticed. None of you investigated. None of you created systems that would have caught this before it put people's lives at risk. I turned to face the room. "So you're right, Mr. Grant. I'm not qualified by traditional standards. But traditional standards clearly haven't been working. What I am qualified to do is give a damn about the people who actually make this organization function. And I'm qualified to recognize patterns of abuse because I survived them. If that's not sufficient qualification for you, I suggest you take it up with Mr. Rossi." The silence was absolute. Then Michael stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Ms. Torres has my complete confidence and authority. Anyone who has a problem with her appointment is welcome to submit their resignation. Anyone who undermines her work will be terminated. Are we clear?" A murmur of assent went around the room. Thomas looked like he'd swallowed something bitter, but he nodded. "Good," Michael said. "Now let's discuss the structural changes Director Torres has proposed." The next 3 hours were grueling. I walked them through my plan. A complete overhaul of the Human Resources Department, new reporting structures, mandatory training for all managers, third-party audits of working conditions, expanded healthcare coverage, paid family leave, and a confidential reporting system that bypassed direct management. Every proposal met resistance. The cost was too high. The changes were too drastic. Employees would take advantage of the new policies. It wasn't industry standard. It would hurt competitiveness. But Michael backed me on every point. More than that, he questioned the managers who resisted. "Why do you assume employees will abuse paid family leave? What does it say about our culture that you expect the worst from our people? If our competitiveness depends on employees being afraid to take sick leave, what kind of organization have we built?" By the time the meeting ended, I was exhausted, but exhilarated. We'd won approval for the core initiatives. Implementation would take months, but we had the mandate to proceed. As the room cleared, Michael gestured for me to stay. When we were alone, he smiled. "Well handled. Especially the part about them failing to notice. Grant looked like you'd slapped him. I was worried I was too aggressive. You were appropriately aggressive. These men respect strength. Show weakness and they'll tear you apart. Show confidence and competence, and they'll fall in line." He paused. "How are you really feeling? That was a lot for your first day back." "Honestly, terrified. I have no idea if I can actually pull this off." "You can," Michael said with certainty, "because you care more about getting it right than about protecting your position. That makes you different from everyone else in that room." Over the next 3 months, I built my team. I hired Rosa Martinez, a fierce advocate with 20 years of labor relations experience, to handle legal compliance. I brought on David Kim, an organizational psychologist who'd made his career studying workplace culture transformation. I recruited Elena, yes, the same Elena from housekeeping with the broken wrist, to head up our employee assistance program, because she understood from personal experience what vulnerable workers needed. We worked 16-hour days. We investigated complaints, revised policies, conducted trainings, and gradually, painfully, began to change the culture. It wasn't smooth. We had pushback, sabotage, and outright resistance from managers who saw employee welfare as a threat to productivity. But we also had victories. Marcus got his insulin pump and a flexible schedule that let him manage his diabetes properly. A warehouse supervisor who'd been forcing employees to work through OSHA violations was fired and prosecuted. We implemented a mental health program after discovering that 30% of employees showed signs of chronic stress disorders. The most significant breakthrough came when we launched the confidential reporting system. We called it Safe Speak, and I personally reviewed every submission. In the first week, we got 8 reports. In the first month, 63. The floodgates had opened. Some reports were minor. Schedule conflicts, personality clashes, requests for clarification on policies. But others were devastating. Sexual harassment by senior staff, wage theft in the restaurant operations, a foreman at one of the construction sites who was taking kickbacks from suppliers and forcing employees to work with defective safety equipment. Each report got investigated, each finding got addressed, and each resolution got communicated back to employees, showing them that speaking up mattered, that their voices had power. Michael was true to his word about backing me. When I recommended firing a well-liked regional manager for creating a hostile work environment, he fired the manager the same day. When I proposed spending $300,000 on upgraded safety equipment for the warehouses, he approved it without question. When senior staff complained that my department was overreaching, he told them to deal with it or leave. 6 months into my tenure, I was reviewing quarterly injury reports, which had decreased by 42%, actual decreases this time, not hidden ones, when Rosa knocked on my office door. "We have a situation," she said, her expression grave. "One of the SafeSpeak reports. You need to see this." The report was from a woman named Jennifer who worked at Rossi's flagship restaurant. She described a pattern of behavior by the head chef, Marcus Valentino, who was not only verbally abusive, but had created an environment where female staff were regularly subjected to inappropriate comments and unwanted touching. But here was the complication. Marcus Valentino was Michael's childhood friend. They'd grown up together. Marcus had been one of Michael's first hires when he'd taken over the family business. "How solid is the evidence?" I asked. "Very," Rosa said. "I've conducted preliminary interviews with 5 other employees, all corroborating the pattern. 2 have specific incidents with dates and witnesses. This isn't ambiguous." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision ahead. This was the test. Would Michael's commitment to change survive when it cost him personally? I called him. "I need to see you in my office. Now. It's urgent." 20 minutes later, I laid out the case against Marcus Valentino. I showed him the report, the corroborating testimony, the pattern of behavior. I watched Michael's expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like grief. "Marcus," he said quietly. "God damn it, Marcus. I'm recommending immediate suspension pending a full investigation, followed by termination if the investigation confirms the pattern," I said. "I know he's your friend. I know what I'm asking." "Do it," Michael interrupted. "Investigate, and if it's true, fire him. Friendship doesn't give anyone the right to victimize my employees." "Michael, are you sure? This is going to cost you." "It's going to cost those women more if we don't act," he said firmly. "This is exactly what we built this department to prevent. If I make an exception for Marcus because he's my friend, then everything we've been working for means nothing. We become exactly the kind of organization we're trying not to be." He stood, his face a mask of controlled anger. "Handle it by the book, Maya. I don't want to know the details of the investigation. I can't be objective. You make the call, and I'll support it." He paused at the door. "And Maya, thank you for not burying this, for not being afraid to bring it to me even knowing the personal cost. That's exactly the integrity I need." The investigation took 2 weeks and confirmed everything. Marcus Valentino was fired. He tried to appeal to Michael personally. Michael refused to see him. 3 of the women who'd reported him filed lawsuits. We settled all 3, part of the settlement including a company-wide mandatory training program on workplace harassment. The message rippled through the organization. No one was untouchable. Not old friends. Not high performers. Not anyone. If you violated the rules, if you abused your position, you were gone. Something shifted after that. The resistance we'd been facing lessened. Managers started actually implementing the policies rather than paying lip service. Employees started trusting the system. SafeSpeak reports became more specific, more confident. People believed they'd be heard. And the organization began to transform. Not overnight, not perfectly, but genuinely. Productivity increased. Turnover decreased. We started attracting better talent because word got out that Rossi Enterprises actually gave a damn about its people. 9 months into my role, I received an email that made me cry in my office. It was from Marcus, my diabetic driver. "Director Torres," it read. "I wanted you to know that I saw my endocrinologist yesterday, and my A1C levels are the best they've been in 5 years. Having access to proper management and treatment, plus the flexible schedule to actually use it, has literally saved my life. I know you understand what that means. Thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for caring. Thank you for surviving so you could help the rest of us survive too." I printed that email and pinned it to my office wall, because that was why we were doing this. Not for the metrics or the policies or the organizational charts, for the Marcuses and the Elenas and the Jennifers, for every person who'd been suffering in silence, for the simple, radical belief that people deserve to be treated with dignity, regardless of their position. The revolution was ongoing. But it was working, and I was just getting started. The first anniversary of my collapse fell on a Tuesday, just like the original. I marked the occasion not by collapsing on a sidewalk, but by standing in front of 300 Rossi Enterprises employees at our first annual Employee Wellness Summit. My heart, repaired, regulated, steady, beat calmly as I looked out at the crowd of people whose lives had been changed by the same systemic overhaul that had saved mine. A year ago today, I began, my voice amplified by the microphone but still carrying the traces of my working-class origins. I nearly died 3 blocks from the Rossi mansion because I was too afraid to ask for medical help. I'm not standing here to tell you a heartwarming story about how everything worked out. I'm standing here to tell you that what happened to me was a systemic failure, and that systemic failures require systemic solutions. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation. This is data from the past year. Worker injury reports are up 68%. That sounds bad, right? Except it's actually good, because it means people are finally reporting injuries instead of hiding them out of fear. Medical leave usage is up 43%. Also good. It means people are taking care of their health instead of working through serious illness. Employee satisfaction scores have increased by 56%. Turnover has decreased by 38%. Healthcare costs are down 22% because we're catching problems early instead of dealing with emergency situations. I let those numbers breathe for a moment. Those statistics represent real people. They represent Elena, who got proper treatment for her broken wrist and is now training to be a supervisor. They represent Marcus, who's managing his diabetes effectively and just celebrated 5 years with the company. They represent Jennifer and the other women who found the courage to speak up about harassment and saw actual consequences follow. Another slide. But I'm not here to celebrate what we've accomplished. I'm here to talk about what we still need to fix. The mood in the room shifted, curious and slightly apprehensive. We've made massive progress in the past year, but we're not done. Not even close. We've fixed the most egregious problems, the active exploitation, the embezzlement, the harassment. But we're still operating in an industry and an economic system that fundamentally undervalues labor. We still have employees working 2 jobs to afford rent. We still have single parents struggling with childcare. We still have people making impossible choices between their financial security and their well-being. I advance to the next slide showing wage distribution across the company. This is where we start phase 2. We're implementing a living wage standard across all business units. Not minimum wage, living wage. That means enough to afford housing, healthcare, food, and basic savings in the areas where our employees actually live. We're expanding our childcare assistance program. We're creating pathways for advancement that don't require employees to have expensive degrees they can't afford. We're making Rossi Enterprises a place where work is something you do, not something that slowly destroys you. I paused, making eye contact with Michael, who stood at the back of the room. He nodded slightly, his expression unreadable, but his presence a reminder of the commitment that made all of this possible. None of this happens without leadership that prioritizes people over profit margins. None of this happens without employees who are willing to speak up when things are wrong. And none of this happens without understanding that loyalty is earned, not demanded. Real loyalty comes from knowing that your employer values you as a human being, not just as a production unit. The presentation continued for another 30 minutes, detailing the initiatives we'd be rolling out over the next year. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. But it was the conversations afterward, the employees who approached me with tears in their eyes to share how the changes had impacted their lives, that made the day meaningful. That evening, Michael invited me to his office, the same office where he'd made the decision to fire Vincent Torelli a year ago. The space had changed. Where there had once been Baroque displays of wealth, there was now a more understated elegance. The desk that had served as a barrier, was replaced with a round conference table that put everyone at eye level. "You were magnificent today," Michael said, pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water. He'd stopped drinking alcohol months ago, part of his own personal transformation. That line about loyalty being earned, not demanded, where did that come from? "From watching you this year," I said honestly. "A year ago, you believed loyalty came from fear and financial dependency. Now you understand it comes from respect and mutual care. That's a fundamental philosophical shift." Michael settled into his chair, studying me with that intense focus I'd grown accustomed to. "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? The night after I found you on that sidewalk, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how I'd built my entire organization on the same principles my father used. Fear, hierarchy, the belief that showing weakness was fatal. And then I realized that those principles had almost killed someone who'd done nothing wrong except be loyal to a fault." He leaned forward. "My father taught me that power was about control. But you taught me that power is actually about responsibility. The responsibility to protect the people who depend on you. The responsibility to build systems that serve humanity rather than exploit it. The responsibility to admit when you're wrong and commit to being better. That's a heavy responsibility," I observed. "It is, but it's the right one." He smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face into something younger, lighter. "Do you know what the most unexpected outcome of this transformation has been? It's profitable. Actually profitable. Our recruitment costs have plummeted because people want to work here. Our productivity is up because people aren't constantly stressed and sick. Our reputation has improved so much that we're getting contracts we never would have been considered for before. Treating people well isn't just moral. It's good business." "Don't let that become the primary justification," I warned. "The moment we start treating employee welfare as a profit strategy rather than a moral imperative, we lose the plot." "Agreed, but it's a useful argument for convincing other business leaders to follow suit." He pulled out a folder. "Speaking of which, I've been approached by the Chamber of Commerce to speak about our organizational transformation. They want to hold me up as an example of progressive business leadership." I couldn't help but laugh. The former mob-adjacent businessman being celebrated for progressive leadership. That's quite a rebrand. "Former alleged mob-adjacent businessman," Michael corrected with a wry smile. "Let's keep our legal terminology straight. But yes, it's surreal. And it wouldn't be possible without you. Which brings me to my next point." He slid the folder across the table. Inside was an organizational chart for a new division, Rossi Enterprises Social Impact Group. At the top of the chart was a single title, Chief People Officer, with my name beside it. "What is this?" I asked, though the implications were becoming clear. "It's a promotion and an expansion of your role. You'll still oversee all HR and employee welfare initiatives, but you'll also lead our community investment programs, our supplier diversity initiatives, and our corporate social responsibility strategy. It comes with a significant salary increase, a seat on the executive leadership team, and the authority to make decisions about how we allocate resources for social impact." I stared at the organizational chart, overwhelmed. "Michael, a year ago I was cleaning your bathrooms. A year ago you were a housekeeper with more integrity and insight than everyone on my executive team combined. Now you're the Chief People Officer because you've proven you can transform an organization from the inside out. This isn't charity, Maya. This is recognition of what you've already accomplished, and an investment in what you can accomplish next. What if I fail? What if I can't handle this level of responsibility?" "Then you'll fail, and we'll figure out what went wrong and try something different," Michael said simply. "That's what growth looks like. But I don't think you'll fail. You're the most competent, principled leader I've ever worked with. And unlike most executives, you actually remember what it's like to be vulnerable, which makes you dangerous in the best possible way." I thought about Mason, now 9 years old, and in remission from his leukemia. I thought about how far we'd come from that Tuesday afternoon when I'd collapsed on a sidewalk. I thought about the 300 employees at the summit today, and the thousands of others across all our business units whose lives had improved because we'd committed to doing better. "I'll do it," I said, "but I have conditions." Michael laughed. "You always do. What are they this time?" "I want to create a nonprofit foundation funded by Rossi Enterprises that provides healthcare navigation and financial assistance to low-income families. I want to establish a scholarship program for employees' children. And I want us to publicly commit to B Corporation certification within 2 years, which means legally binding ourselves to consider social and environmental impact in all business decisions." "Done, done, and done," Michael said without hesitation. "What else?" "I want you to tell me the truth about something." I met his eyes. "Why did you really do all this? The complete organizational transformation, the massive investment in employee welfare, turning your entire business philosophy upside down. Was it guilt? Strategy? Genuine moral awakening? What actually drove this?" Michael was quiet for a long moment. "All of the above, honestly. Yes, I felt guilty. Finding you on that sidewalk, realizing I'd created a system that nearly killed you, that was devastating. Yes, I saw a strategic value in building a more sustainable organization, but mostly..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I realized I was becoming my father, building the same empire of fear and exploitation, just with better PR. And I looked at that trajectory and decided I wanted to be someone different, someone who could face himself in the mirror, someone who used power to protect rather than to dominate." "That's the real transformation," I said softly. "Not the policies or the programs, the internal recognition that there's a better way to be powerful." "You taught me that," Michael said, "by surviving, by refusing to stay silent once you were safe, by giving a damn about people I'd been trained to see as expendable. You showed me what courage actually looks like, and it looked nothing like what my father taught me." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two people from completely different worlds who'd somehow found common cause in trying to make one small corner of the business world more humane. "I have something for you," Michael said, pulling a small wrapped package from his desk drawer. "Open it." Inside was a simple silver pendant on a chain. The pendant was engraved with a date, the Tuesday I'd collapsed. Beneath the date were 3 words: survived, resisted, transformed. "I had it made for you," Michael explained, "as a reminder that your survival was just the beginning. The real work was everything that came after, the resistance to accepting things as they were, and the transformation of what could be." I held the pendant, feeling its weight, understanding its meaning. "Thank you for all of it, for finding me that day, for listening, for actually changing." "Thank you for not letting me off the hook," Michael replied, "for demanding better, for believing it was possible, even when I wasn't sure." As I left his office that evening, the pendant around my neck, I thought about trajectories. A year ago, I'd been dying slowly, convinced that my suffering was the price of my son's survival. Now I was a chief people officer, architecting systemic change that would outlast both Michael and me. The revolution we'd started was no longer just about Rossi Enterprises. Other companies were watching, learning, adapting. We'd received inquiries from dozens of organizations wanting to understand how we'd achieved such dramatic cultural transformation. We'd become, unlikely as it seemed, a model for how business could operate differently. But I never forgot where it started, with a desperate woman collapsing on a sidewalk because she was too afraid to ask for help. That woman was still part of me, would always be part of me. She informed every decision I made, every policy I crafted, every time I stood up in a meeting full of powerful men and demanded they do better. The housekeeper who collapsed had become the executive who transformed, and the empire built on fear had become an organization built on care. That was the real story. Not a fairy tale of rescue, but a messy, difficult, ongoing commitment to choosing humanity over profit, dignity over domination, and courage over compliance. The revolution was still ongoing, and I was just getting started. 2 years after my collapse, Rossi Enterprises achieved B Corporation certification, legally binding ourselves to balance profit with purpose. The certification process had been grueling, 18 months of documentation, audits, and structural changes. But the day I received the official notification, I printed it out and walked straight to Michael's office. "We did it," I said, placing the certificate on his desk. Michael looked up from his laptop, and I saw the fatigue in his eyes. The transformation had taken a toll on him too. Not physically, but emotionally. He'd lost friendships, business relationships, and the respect of peers who viewed our approach as naive or financially reckless. But he'd also gained something more valuable: integrity. "We did," he agreed, picking up the certificate. "Though I think we is doing a lot of heavy lifting. You did most of the work." "I had someone willing to fund it and protect it," I countered. "That's rarer than you think." He smiled, but it was bittersweet. "Did you see the Wall Street Journal article this morning?" I had. The headline read, "From Mafia Money to Social Impact, the Unlikely Transformation of Rossi Enterprises." The article was mostly positive, chronicling our journey from a business with questionable ethical standards to a certified B Corporation. But it also included skeptical commentary from business analysts, questioning whether our model was sustainable, whether we were sacrificing necessary profitability for feel-good optics. "They're wrong, you know," I said. "We're more profitable now than we were 2 years ago. 23% growth. But more importantly, we're sustainable. Our turnover rate is the lowest in our industry. Our employee engagement scores are off the charts. We're attracting top talent that would never have considered us before." "I know the numbers," Michael said, "but the narrative bothers me. This idea that caring about people is some kind of soft weakness, that it's incompatible with business success. We've proven that's false, but the prejudice persists." "Because it threatens the existing power structure," I observed. "If other companies follow our model, executives can't justify exploitative practices anymore. We're a threat to the status quo, Michael. Of course there's pushback." He stood, walking to the window overlooking the city. "I got a call yesterday from Anthony Marconi. Remember him?" I did. Anthony Marcone was one of Michael's father's old associates, still operating in the gray areas between legitimate business and organized crime. Michael had cut ties with him years ago, part of his effort to legitimize the Rossi operations completely. What did he want? To tell me I'd gone soft, that my father would be ashamed, that I'd taken a perfectly functional organization and turned it into a charity case that would collapse within 5 years. Michael's jaw tightened. He said loyalty used to mean something in our world, and now I'd betrayed that legacy by prioritizing the help over profit and power. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that my father's legacy nearly killed an innocent woman and corrupted my entire organization from the inside. I told him that the old model of loyalty was just another word for exploitation, and I told him that I'd rather be soft and ethical than hard and corrupt." He turned to face me. Then I hung up on him. I walked over to stand beside him at the window. "You know what the real difference is between you and people like Marconi? You learned. You saw something wrong, and you had the courage to admit it and change it. That's not weakness. That's evolution." "Sometimes I wonder if we're just lucky," Michael admitted. "If we'd tried this transformation in a different economic climate, with different timing, without your specific insights and leadership, would it have worked? Or are we just the beneficiaries of circumstances aligning?" "Luck favors the prepared," I said. "And the willing." Yes, we had favorable circumstances, but we also made deliberate choices. We could have done the minimum, made cosmetic changes, claimed victory, and moved on. Instead, we committed to fundamental transformation. That wasn't luck. That was intention. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. "The reporter from NPR is here for your interview." Right. I'd agreed to be interviewed for a segment about workplace transformation and employee welfare initiatives. Part of our strategy was to be public about our approach, to demonstrate that alternative models were possible, to inspire other organizations to consider similar changes. "Wish me luck," I said to Michael. "You don't need luck," he replied. "You need what you've always had, the truth and the courage to tell it." The interview went well. The reporter, a sharp woman named Catherine Chen, asked tough questions about sustainability, about whether our model could scale to larger organizations, about the challenges of maintaining values-driven leadership in a profit-driven economy. I answered honestly, acknowledging the difficulties while emphasizing the possibilities. "What would you say to critics who argue that your approach is unrealistic for most businesses?" Catherine asked near the end of our conversation. "I'd say they're half right," I responded. "It is unrealistic if you define business success purely by short-term profit maximization. But if you define success more broadly, as building sustainable organizations that create value for all stakeholders, not just shareholders, then not only is it realistic, it's necessary. We're facing a crisis of worker exploitation, burnout, and inequality that threatens the entire economic system. Organizations that figure out how to genuinely care for their people aren't being unrealistic. They're being adaptive." After Catherine left, I returned to my office to find Mason sitting in one of my chairs, doing homework. He was 11 now, tall for his age, his leukemia in long-term remission. The treatments had worked. The insurance I'd nearly died to keep had saved his life. "Hey, Mom," he said without looking up from his math problems. "Mr. Rossi said I could wait here for you." "Mr. Rossi lets you into the executive suite to do homework? He says I'm his favorite visitor because I actually tell him when he's wrong about stuff." Mason grinned. "Today, he asked me about a marketing campaign for teenagers, and I told him it was embarrassing. He said that was the most valuable feedback he'd gotten all week." I laughed, settling into my chair. This was another unexpected outcome of the transformation. Michael's relationship with Mason. They'd bonded over chess initially, but it had evolved into something like a mentorship. Michael, who had no children of his own, had taken a genuine interest in Mason's life, education, and development. And Mason, who'd never known his father, had found in Michael something he needed. "How's the homework coming?" "Fine, but I have a question." Mason looked up, his expression serious. "Why did you keep working when you were so sick? Mrs. Chen told me you almost died because you wouldn't stop." I'd been dreading this conversation, but I'd also known it was inevitable. Mason was old enough now to understand, and he deserved the truth. "Because I was scared," I said simply. "I thought if I stopped working, I'd lose my job and the health insurance. And without the health insurance, you couldn't get the treatments you needed for your cancer. So I chose to keep working, even though it was dangerous for me." Mason was quiet for a moment, processing this. "That's a stupid system." Yes, it is. "But you fixed it, right? You made it so other people don't have to make that choice?" "I'm trying to. We've made a lot of progress, but there's still work to do." "Good." He returned to his homework, the conversation apparently complete in his mind. But then he added, almost as an afterthought, "I'm proud of you, Mom, for not dying and for fixing things." I had to turn away for a moment, overwhelmed. Children had a way of cutting through complexity to reach the essential truth. I hadn't died, and I had fixed things, or at least begun to. That was worth being proud of. That evening, I attended a dinner with other business leaders who were interested in learning about Rossi Enterprises' transformation. It was hosted by the Chamber of Commerce, the same organization that had once viewed Michael with suspicion and now held him up as an example of progressive leadership. During the dinner, a CEO named Richard Blackstone cornered me by the bar. "I have to ask," he said, his tone skeptical. "Don't you worry that your approach creates a sense of entitlement among employees? That they'll start expecting more and more until it becomes unsustainable?" "No," I said flatly. "I worry about the opposite. I worry that employees have been conditioned to expect so little that they accept exploitation as normal. I worry that we've created a system where people are grateful just to be treated with basic human dignity. That's not entitlement. That's dystopia." Richard looked taken aback. "But surely there has to be a balance." "The balance is that people work hard and in return receive fair compensation, safe conditions, reasonable hours, and the ability to have lives outside of work. That's not radical. That's just decent." I took a sip of my water. The real question is why so many business leaders view basic decency as an unreasonable expectation. Because it cuts into profit margins. "Does it, though?" I interrupted. "Our profit margins are up, our productivity is up, our revenue is up. The idea that you have to exploit workers to be profitable is a myth that benefits people who profit from exploitation. We're living proof that there's another way." Richard excused himself shortly after, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. But 3 other executives approached me afterward, asking genuine questions about implementation, about how to start similar transformations in their own organizations, about whether I'd be willing to consult. I gave them all the same answer. I'm not interested in helping organizations check a box for good PR. But if you're genuinely committed to fundamental change, if you're willing to be uncomfortable and challenge existing power structures and risk short-term pain for long-term sustainability, then yes, I'll help you. That's what this is about. Not performative gestures. Real commitment. By the end of the evening, I'd had substantive conversations with 5 CEOs who seemed genuinely interested in pursuing transformation. Whether they'd follow through was uncertain, but the fact that they were asking the questions at all represented progress. As I drove home that night, past the spot where I'd collapsed 2 years ago, I thought about trajectories again. Not just mine, but the broader trajectory of how we think about work, value, and human dignity. The transformation at Rossi Enterprises was significant, but it was also just one data point in a larger movement toward more humane economic systems. The revolution we'd started in one organization was rippling outward. Other companies were watching, learning, adapting. The business press was covering stakeholder capitalism more seriously. Workers were demanding better conditions with more confidence. The conversation was shifting. It was slow. It was imperfect. There were setbacks and resistance, and people like Richard Blackstone who would never understand why exploitation wasn't acceptable. But the direction was clear. We were moving, gradually but inevitably, toward a world where choosing between your health and your job wasn't a choice anyone had to make. When I got home, I found Michael's gift on my doorstep, a potted tree with a card that read, "For Maya, who taught me that the strongest roots grow from the deepest care. Thank you for saving us all. Mist Thar." I brought the tree inside and placed it by the window where Mason and I ate breakfast every morning. It would grow there, a living reminder of transformation, of the revolutionary act of caring, of the simple truth that people matter more than profit. The housekeeper who'd collapsed on a sidewalk had become the executive who'd transformed an empire. But more importantly, she'd become proof that vulnerability could be strength, that surviving could lead to revolution, and that one person's courage to demand better could change the trajectory of thousands of lives. The story didn't end there. It never really ends. Transformation is ongoing, requiring constant attention, constant commitment, constant courage. But as I sat in my apartment that night, my son asleep in the next room, my repaired heart beating steadily, my future secure. I felt something I'd never expected to feel again. Hope. Not naive hope. Not wishful thinking. But the grounded, earned hope that comes from witnessing real change, from being part of creating something better, from knowing that the struggle was worth it because it meant that somewhere, right now, someone else didn't have to choose between their life and their child's future. That was the revolution. Not a moment, but a movement. Not a fairy tale, but a blueprint. Not the end of the story, but the beginning of a different way forward. And I, Maya Torres, former housekeeper, current chief people officer, reluctant revolutionary, was honored to be part of it.